Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. I know Alan's here with his dinner, so thanks so much for joining us. So for those of you who haven't been to one of mine and Phil's little webinars before, we like to do some things together because Phil does where I do estate planning and things like that. Phil kind of fills in the gaps. I didn't mean for that to be a pun, but it was. With things like protection and can help you with your pensions and things like that. And he's really lovely and really helpful, and I really enjoy working with him. And my clients give me like glowing reports when they work with him, so that's great too. So we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about future-proofing your finances and kind of like what you can do now so that you don't have to worry about things in the future no matter what happens. So I'm just going to move this down real quick and we'll get started. I'm just going to jump into my bit and then I'll turn over to Phil to do his. And if you have any questions as we go through, feel free to just like unmute yourself and just talk, or you can go in the chat and ask us any questions that you might have there. Okay, so I think probably most of you know me. I'm going to do my same spiel again. I'm CiCi. I started Brilliant in 2018, but I've been doing estate planning and different like financial services things, admin for financial advisors and stuff since I moved over here, which was September 2017. So almost 3 years ago now. Wow, time flies. And I am from North Carolina in the States, and my family still lives there, and I have a little sister in Virginia too. And hopefully I'll be able to go back over there and see them soon. The dog in the photo is Harley, my miniature English bulldog. She's 17 months old and the light of my life. I love her so much. I just joined another Facebook group with like a dog Facebook group, and I like posted a picture of her, like this really like, you know, really cute, like with the light shining on her, picture of her. And I got like 70 likes in an hour, and I was like, Harley, you're famous. And she was just asleep like this. Anyway, so I'm one of those people. But I'm also passionate about helping others. Everything that I've ever done, whether it was like financial services and things when I moved over here to more like management and customer service things back in the States, like property management and stuff, I always enjoyed like having that connection and helping other people. And it's funny, actually, when I moved here, I got into estate planning sort of on a whim. One of my husband's friends is a mortgage and protection advisor, and he owned a will business at the time, and he was looking for more introducers here up north in Newcastle, where I live now. So I took this course and actually discovered that I really love estate planning, and I was really good at it. And so it did end up that I worked for him, but I sort of did some other things for some other people in finance and helped them start up their estate planning divisions. And then I thought, well, I'll do it for myself. But it goes really well with my personal experience too, because when I was young, my mom was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. She was like 36 at the time, and it was really out of nowhere, and we didn't have any like wills or certainly no trust or lasting powers of attorney or anything like that in place. So it was obviously really difficult because she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. But then it was even more difficult because there were all these financial implications on top of that. And I find that with people in general, we never think it's going to happen to us until it does. I think that's like a pretty common theme. And these things can be really difficult to talk about. You don't want to think about like if something happened to me, what would happen to my kids? Like, you know, you don't want to think about like if you're in a business partnership with somebody, if like something happened to them and their like spouse or something took over, like would you be able to run the business together? They're not things that you sort of like normally would think about, but I think it's important that you do, and then you put that stuff in place, you know it's all set up, and then you don't have to think about it again. So you just do it the once and then you're done. So yeah, it really fits in with what's important to me, and I really enjoy doing it. What's different, I think, about Brilliant and the way that I do things is I try to kind of like what I was touching on earlier is future-proof documents. So whereas like in your will, you can name like different appointments to do different things. So like you can have an executor, guardians for your kids, and then beneficiaries. But you can also put like reserve appointments in. So you can have like, you know, I want my husband to be my executor, but if he were to predecease me, then I want to choose my sister, or whatever the case may be. And you can sort of add that other line in there. You can always have like professional executors and things like that too. And basically just whatever we can possibly do to sort of like predict the future in a way, and make sure that we put kind of everything in there that we could possibly think of at this point in time that you might need. And then the only reason that you would need to change these documents is if something significantly changes in your life. Like maybe if you had another kid that you wanted to include by name in a document, or if you were to get divorced, or maybe you were single at the time and got married, something like that, something like big change, then obviously you need to rewrite it. I also, because of what I've been through, I have a lot of compassion and empathy for people. Because what I went through with my mom and other things, when people come to me who have just experienced a loss, which is a lot of times what I get with people, because again, you never think it's going to happen to you. So when something like that does happen to somebody close to you, you start thinking about it yourself. And then people will typically get in touch with me. But also equally, some people aren't that serious about it and want to like have a little joke about it. And I like a bit of dark humor, so we can have a good time and chat over a coffee. And I don't think it has to be like a sit across a walnut desk with somebody in like a gray suit. Like it can be like just chatting with a friend, or I can hold your hand if you need that or whatever. It doesn't have to be quite so drab. I also like to keep things accessible and understandable for everyone. I like to do webinars like this. I don't even know how many videos at this point I have on like different topics on my website. I have like a whole FAQ section on my website. I write different blogs about different things, like how to choose an executor and what that means. And I just try to use simple, straightforward language in stuff like this, in what I write in my videos and when I'm just talking to people, because I think that it's important to kind of like demystify estate planning and explain like why it's important. And I also offer bespoke recommendations. So every single person is different, every single family is different, and everybody has different priorities. So what I do when somebody comes to me is I just talk to them, get an idea of like what they do, what their family life is like, and then what they're worried about. Provide them with a list of recommendations of all the things that they can do to protect themselves, and then they get to decide what they want to do. So I just want to briefly go over my services. So wills, trusts, LPAs, and I do some business stuff as well. So a will, I think everybody knows what it is. It says what you want to happen when you die. So it's not for you because you're already gone and you don't know the difference. It's to make life a little bit easier for the people that you leave behind. So making sure that people kind of know who you want things to go to, who you want to like make those decisions if you have kids, who you want to be guardians of your kids. If you have a dog or something that's really special to you like mine, where do you want your dog to go? Harley is definitely in my will. Whatever's important to you, you can put in there. And it makes life easier for your family to know things like, you know, do you want to be buried or cremated? And who do you want to have that, like, you know, that ring that was your mother's or whatever, because they're mourning your loss and then trying to make these other difficult decisions. If you haven't been there, again, you might not know about it. So I'm here to kind of tell you about it. And you just put it all in black and white and then it's there. You don't have to worry about it. Trusts are ways to pass on like money, and you can put your house in trust to protect from care fees and things. Phil does some really great stuff with trusts as far as like charitable giving and things like that. He's really big on philanthropy. So if that's something that interests you, definitely get in touch with him about that. Also, it can be good for like inheritance tax purposes, all kinds of reasons that you might use a trust. A lasting power of attorney is a document that protects you now while you're alive. So while your will is for everybody that you leave behind, your LPA is for you. I think less than 1% of the adult population in the UK even has an LPA. And I think that's because people don't understand what they're for and how they can help. So a lot of people think that LPAs are only for if you lose capacity, maybe like you have dementia or something like that. I think that's a lot of the context that people think about LPAs in. But actually they can help you for all sorts of reasons. A few years ago back in the States, for example, I was in a car accident. And thankfully I was okay, but it could have been a difficult situation, a different situation. And if I had been like, knocked unconscious or whatever thing, then I would have needed to have a lasting power of attorney to have appointed somebody to make decisions for me. Same thing is like if you go on holiday or something, and there's some sort of like, I'll steal from my own experience. We just moved into this house in January and there's a huge plumbing issue that we had no idea about. That was really fun. So it could be something is like that you go on holiday and, maybe I'd be like back in the States with my family or something out of the country. And there was some sort of like plumbing issue and some documents needed to be signed for the insurance company or something. Obviously I'm not here. That would be quite hard for me to do. But if I had an attorney who was here in the UK, then they could just sign the document for me because I allowed them to do so. So there's all sorts of different reasons that might apply, as well as just the sort of like you think like later on in life that you lose capacity. But again, with all of this stuff, you kind of have to have it in place before you need it, because by the time you need it, it's too late. And then some of the business stuff that I do so LPAs, but just for your business. So like if you have a partner, you might want to have a separate, like if you have a business partner, you might want to have a separate business LPA to allow that person to make decisions relating to the business if you give them permission to, or if you're unable to for whatever reason. You can also put like business clauses in your will, and I can write like family business trusts so that you can say like, I own this business and I want the assets of this business to go into this trust for my family, including like these beneficiaries. So spouse, kids, grandkids, even whoever. You can also do cross option agreements. I can do those for you. So they just ensure that like your business partner can carry on while your family benefit if something were to happen to you. And then shareholder trusts. So if you have like a company owned life insurance policy, you can put it in trust so that your business partner can like purchase your share of the business if you were to pass away, and kind of carry on in that way. And then obviously your family gets the money from that. And Phil can write those like policies and do that stuff for you. So I'm sure he's going to talk about that when we get to it. Yeah, so the reason that this stuff is important, other than what I've already gone over, so 31 million people now run the risk of dying intestate. So that's like the amount of people who don't have a will and will pass away without a will is called dying intestate. And that means that your assets are distributed in accordance with intestacy law, which is really antiquated. Some of the laws are from like the 1800s still. Like a lot of it hasn't really been updated. So things like, just because you're married doesn't mean everything is going to go to your spouse. Just because you've named godparents for your kids doesn't mean that they would necessarily go to those people, because it's up to the court and the intestacy laws to decide those things. And I've seen, again, with the losses that I've experienced in my life, loss does strange things to people and makes them behave in different ways that you wouldn't necessarily think that they would. People come out of the woodwork and that kind of thing. So it's just important to write down what you want to happen, and that way it does. LPAs, I kind of went over that already. Basically what this means is that if you lose capacity at any point or pass away without a will, you really don't have any control over what's going to happen, because things will just, again, go in accordance with intestacy law, or like if anything happened to you and you were in the hospital or whatever, it wouldn't necessarily be your next of kin that would make those healthcare decisions for you. It could be somebody appointed by the local authority or like by the hospital. It could be like a doctor or like some sort of like social worker or something like that make those choices, including end of life decisions, which I know is something that I would want my family to do and not some like a stranger. So it's really important. I just put some testimonials all in here because it's easier for other people to brag for me rather than me having to do it myself. But I just recently worked with these two ladies and they were fab. I really enjoyed it. Lucy, kind of what I was talking about before is we like actually sat down on Zoom and we just like had a bit of a laugh. And like, while it was like hard for her to talk about it, and I think she was quite apprehensive about it and had put it off, it wasn't so bad. Like, I think we tend to work things up in our heads, and it wasn't too bad. And then Margaret, again, I think it was just like, because I just use regular people words, it's sort of like understand what I mean and why it's important, and try to make the process as like seamless and easy as possible. So if you want to get in touch with me about any of this stuff, that's on my contact details there. And if you want to watch any more of those like videos, like the FAQ videos, and I have like a whole myth busting series of like 24 videos I made last year and all kinds of stuff, that's on my website, brilliantestateplanning.com. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to pop them in the chat. And yeah, that's it.
I've got two questions for you, CiCi.
Oh yeah?
Okay. While you're doing that, if that's all right. It's probably in your Mythbusters, but if you believe that your circumstances are quite simple, so if you say, well, actually, in the event of my death, everything would go to my spouse, what's the benefit of having a will in that circumstance?
It wouldn't always necessarily go to your spouse, because there are certain sort of like monetary values where like an estate up to this much, all of it would go to the spouse and the rest would go to the kids, and then the other 50% of that would go back to the spouse. So it is divvied up kind of funny. Also, again, if like you have people come out of the woodwork again and say that they are due to inherit, then that can cause some trouble as well. And your will isn't always necessarily just about saying who's going to benefit from your estate. It also is about things, like I said, about things like funeral requests and stuff like that, and legacies. Like I have jewelry that has been like passed down from like my great grandmother that goes to like the oldest daughter of every generation. I want that to go to my sister if I don't have a daughter. That's really important. So I need to have that in my will, because like people might not necessarily know that there's things like that, and legacies to charity and all of that stuff. It's just kind of like spelling out in black and white exactly what you want to happen, because although you may just want everything to go to your spouse, there's a little bit more to it than that. And it also makes things easier because he sort of has the will that says that he's the executor or whatever, and he could just go and get the grant of probate and then take that to the bank and do all the stuff he needs to do, rather than kind of going through the intestacy process, which can be more complicated.
Yeah, I think it's that time element. That's the reason I did one, was just to make it easier for the people who are sorting things out. Like you said, if you name someone who's an executor, it's a lot easier than having to go through the courts and intestacy first.
Yeah, exactly.
My second question was about powers of attorney. So thinking about it, it's quite a big responsibility if someone's responsible for your health and or your finances.
Sure.
Do you often speak to the people who are going to be named as the person responsible as well for that, and tell them what their kind of responsibilities are in that respect before they say yes?
Yeah, I will do. So I just communicate with the person who's making the LPA and say, like, obviously I have their contact information anyways. Are you happy for me to talk to them and kind of let them know what's going on, or do you want to talk to them or whatever? And some people kind of want to do it themselves, and a lot of people are quite happy to just get me to do it. But I think, yeah, regardless of who explains it, it is important that people know like what are their responsibilities and what they need to do, and that it's not just sort of like a carte blanche to just like, oh, I'm power of attorney now. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to like have permission, or the donor has to lose capacity and all these things. But yeah, I think I do the same thing with like people who are appointed as guardians in wills and like executors and stuff. Just like tell people, just communicate. It's important, I think, for anything that you do like that. It's like estate planning or stuff like that in general. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, because it could be quite a shock, couldn't it, if someone suddenly tells you you've got this huge decision to make on someone's behalf.
Yeah, it's good to know, and especially if it's like sort of like end of life things, like the health and welfare LPA. Like, what would you want to happen? Like, my mom had a DNR. Like, I don't know if it's called the same thing here, but like a do not resuscitate thing. Like, there's things like that people like specifically like, I don't want to be put on a vent. You know what I mean? Like, people have sort of different priorities, so it's just important to tell the people that you've appointed what you want, so then they can do it. Okay, fab, thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, CiCi. My name's Philip Lancaster, and I'm a financial advisor. And I guess a bit of a background as to why I'm a financial advisor is because I love finance, whether it's studying it through school, university, and all the jobs I've done in the last several years have all been finance related, whether it's private banking, commercial banking, treasury services. But the biggest thing that I enjoy about my role currently is that I talk to individuals, and I talk to them most about what they want to happen in the future and what their goals and dreams are, because we all have ambitions. And it could be something such as buying a house or buying a bigger house, supporting children, or just giving ourselves flexibility. That's a key one for me in terms of, do you want to be able to stop work one day? Would you like the financial flexibility to change jobs, to travel more, or just to have fun now or at some point in the future? But there's a serious point to finances in terms of things can and often do go wrong. And that's why advice is important. So I love talking about that future side, but I also like talking about what can you do now to make sure that in the worst case scenario, you're protected. So the first question is, why have protection at all? And I guess the example I've got here is quite an extreme one. And in terms of Wimbledon Lawn Tennis Club, something I'm quite fond of and have been a few times, they build up for 11 months of the year for 2 weeks of play in the summer. And the worst case scenario for them is that the tennis can't be played, which has just come out and happened. And what happens is they'll have protection to make sure that in the event that tennis can't be played, not only do they recover all the sunk costs for the year, but they also recover the majority of the income that they would have had to make sure they can fund the next year as well. And while this example says, and I don't know if this is true, that they had something called pandemic insurance, I imagine it was part of a wider package that covered a whole host of events that were unforeseen. And it's important here not just how long they had that policy, why they had that policy, but how much as well. How much is it worth to them now and potentially in future years to have that lost income recouped? I guess a bit like CiCi, I've got a pet, an example that's closer to home. A worst case scenario for me is that my pet's injured or ill, and vet fees can be quite high, especially if something serious happens. And what I want to make sure is that I've got the financial means that my pet can have the best treatment available to it. So I've got pet insurance. And I'm in the majority there. Well over 50% of us have pet insurance, and CiCi's nodding her head. I'm sure you've got pet insurance. But there's more worryingly, less than 1 in 10 of us actually insure ourselves. So place the same value that we do on our pets on our own welfare in the event of injury or illness. So thinking about ourselves is often the last thing that we do. We think of everyone else around us but ourselves. So what can you protect? And this is going to differ to everybody because we're all unique. We're all at different stages of our lives and have different priorities. So to give you 2 examples of what you can protect, I help a lot of young families. That seems to be my core client base because I can often relate to what they're going through. And often at some point when you have children, one partner becomes kind of the main income or the sole income for the family. It might not be forever, but it might be for a period of time. And something to consider is what happens if that person who's providing the income becomes injured or ill. And it might be through no fault of their own. And we have this conversation and we say, well, what would happen if you couldn't work for a week? And they say, well, that's not a problem. My employer would pay 100% of my salary and I'd go back to work after that time, which is fine. And then we say, well, what would happen if you were off and you couldn't go back for a month? And this time you're self-employed. And you say, well, that's no problem. I could get somebody else in to cover, or actually my client base is quite flexible. I could return to work after a month and there'd be little detriment. I could even use some emergency funds that I have to see me through that period. But it becomes really worrying when we talk about what happens in 3, even 6 months, even longer. What happens at that point in time if you're still injured, still ill, in terms of helping that person recover, but also making sure that the family's safe so that you can continue living in that house and support the kids and yourself with those future goals that you had. And that would be that bottom right-hand box, providing that income in the event of that injury or illness, making sure that you've got enough funds that at least sustain your standard of living now. Another example is that top left-hand box, something that we all think about, which is what happens if we die? And I was going to give you an example again about a young family, but I'll talk about business context because CiCi was talking a lot about businesses and protecting that. Often I talk to young or growing businesses where there might be 1, 2, 3, 4 shareholders or partners, for example. And often, unfortunately, they don't have a will that states what they'd like to happen in terms of the business context, but they don't have any planning either. So a situation where there's 2 shareholders, maybe 50-50 owning the company, if one person were to suddenly die, those shares may be passed to the surviving spouse of the partner. What would happen then is, would that partner become involved in the business? Would you want that partner to become involved in the business? Would they still expect to receive half the dividends, half the payments, make half the decisions? If you both worked really hard to grow this business, there could be a real problem in that capacity. And what you want in both parties' aspect is the ability to cease that relationship. And that's where you get something called shareholder protection. The ability to have a lump sum amount of money that either party could say, look, this isn't in our best interest. Can we use that money to separate and use that money to buy the shares? The business continues and the family of the person who's died is also supported. So again, it really is bespoke to exactly what you're going through now and potentially in the future. So I've got a slide here about how you can protect, and I could tell you the ins and outs of how you can protect, what to select and when, but we'll be here all day. And this slide is far too busy. Really, it should be entitled, Why Take Advice? Because the benefit of advice is that we make sure that the protection that you have suits your circumstances and your budget. The good news that I often find is that people think, oh, this is a main concern, Phil. I realize what you've just flagged. Let's do it all. Often you've got some protection in place already. You might not know it, but you may have. If, for example, you work in the police, the NHS, or even one of the big employers such as Sage in Newcastle, you'll have something called death in service, which will pay a multiple of your salary in the event that you die. And again, that lump sum could provide that flexibility. It could repay the mortgage, or it could be used to provide that income. If you're self-employed like myself and you might not have death in service, you might have a personal pension. And people think pensions are great, I'm saving for a rainy day or when I reach 65, 70, whatever the goal is. But actually, if you were to die before 75 and have not touched that pension, that pot of money can go to your beneficiaries tax-free. So it's a huge pot of money potentially that you already have in the event of death. So it's worth looking at what you already have at the moment. It might be sufficient already, and then we can focus on actually what is the worst case scenario for you and what else do we need to protect. And finally, again, a busy slide, but I think CiCi touched on it. Hopefully, if we do some protection for you, I hope that you never have to use it. That's the first and foremost thing. But if you do have to use it, what we want to make sure is that the right money goes to the right people at the right time. And again, what you don't want to be bombarded with is jargon about asset preservation trust, business trust, variable discretionary trusts. You want to make sure, will this piece of paper provide peace of mind and express my wishes that I want to happen? And that's what we'll do. We'll have that conversation. And the real benefit advice is that it's not just appropriate now. What we'll do is review it to make sure that it's appropriate in the future as well. And that's really important, a bit like wills. You can plan for every eventuality you could imagine now, but I guarantee you things will change in the future. Something will happen that you didn't foresee. Hopefully good in terms of you've got more money to protect or a bigger business. And again, at that point, we need to redo that insurance or relook at it or do something different. And that's what I love doing with clients, is making sure that they're protected now so that those future goals, ambitions, dreams that they have can come to fruition effectively. So happy to take any questions, and obviously feel free to contact me. I think my contact number and email were on there before. Happy to follow up afterwards as well.